Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonas Staal. I'm an artist speaking to you from Athens right now. Tonight, together with lawyer Jan Fermon, witnesses Paul Goodwin, Maria Ines Plaza-Lazo and Inke Arns, we would have presented Collectivize Facebook, a pre-trial at the HAU Theater in Berlin. We would be standing in the installation that you see right here, an attempt to turn the space of the theater into an alternative people's tribunal. Of course, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we have cancelled this gathering, although we hope in the near future we will be able to assemble with you as planned, because digital means and channels cannot substitute the importance of assembly and intimate collective work. For now, first of all, we send our thoughts to all those affected by the virus, to the care workers that are at the front lines of this pandemic, and to those confronted with the virus in the most vulnerable of circumstances, because of pre-existing conditions or because measures like social distancing and regular hand washing are simply impossible to live up to for the vast parts of the world where running water and soap are luxuries. And this reminds us of the fact that this crisis is not merely caused by a virus, but that it is a crisis fueled by structural inequalities. The precariat will suffer disproportionately and will be asked, as always, to fund the bailout of private industries. So this is a moment not only to support one another, but to turn this crisis into a moment of fundamental transformation. Our aim should not be to return to business as usual, as it is the business as usual of global capitalism and growing authoritarianism that fuels this crisis in the first place. Now is the time to organize, and now is the time to collectivize. It is in that light that we decided to still launch the Collectivized Facebook campaign tonight in the form of this short video introduction and the website. As millions of people are in self-quarantine, our dependency on corporate social media networks grows even further. Many of you will have been confronted these past weeks with the circulation of misinformation through these very same networks with regards to fake coronavirus treatments and bogus safety measures. This is disinformation that circulates through WhatsApp in particular, which in its turn is owned by Facebook. Or on the other hand, you might have noticed the removal by Facebook of information on the coronavirus that is actually accurate. All of this gives us more reason to challenge this corporation's current form of ownership. So please allow me to shortly introduce the context of Collectivized Facebook before lawyer Jan Fermon will talk you through the details. Collectivized Facebook is a collective action lawsuit that Jan Fermon and I have been working on this past year and that we aim to submit to the UN Council of Human Rights in Geneva, demanding the collectivization of Facebook. Our argument is that the complete absence of democratic oversight of Facebook fundamentally threatens the right to self-determination of peoples and individuals, and that as a result, the 2.5 billion active users of Facebook should become its owners. So for us, collectivization does not mean nationalization. Rather, we aim to transform Facebook into a transnational cooperative in which members own and collectively govern the platform. Only shared ownership can socialize social media. At present, Facebook infringes upon the right to self-determination of peoples and individuals in many ways. The corporation instrumentalizes users as neo-feudal data workers, selling our information to third parties. Facebook is used in various surveillance capacities that undermine our privacy and impacts democratic elections in disproportionate ways, of which data capture and targeted campaigns by Cambridge Analytica are a recent example. And the corporation has further willfully advised authoritarian regimes such as that of Duterte in the Philippines. On all of these aspects, Jan Fermon will elaborate more in a moment. You might ask how such a decision by the UN Council of Human Rights would even be achievable. But as recently as the 2008 financial crisis, various banks were nationalized, just as the Spanish government only a week ago nationalized private healthcare infrastructures in the context of the corona pandemic. Our challenge in this pandemic is to collectivize and never again allow criminal elites to take control over our common infrastructures ever again. Due to the coronavirus crisis, private corporations are already standing in line for trillions of handouts. Big Pharma and the securitization complex see this crisis as nothing but another resource to make profits. So now is the time not just to nationalize them, but to cooperatize them. And as we're at it, let's not forget the trillion-dollar companies that have been driving our increasingly precarized existences, all of which we subsidize through massive tax cuts and public infrastructures. Collectivize Amazon, Collectivize Apple, Collectivize Alphabet that owns Google as well as YouTube, the channel that you are watching right now. This crisis is neither the moment to support private industry, nor is it the moment to expand the powers of the nation state. This is the moment to claim new cooperative forms of ownership to enable a habitable world for all of us. And in that process, it is a moment to engage the imaginative space of art to explore how to collectively govern our future together. So tonight we begin with Facebook. I would like to ask you to join us now at collectivize.org. Click the button, download the indictment. This is the indictment you can download as a PDF in either English or German. In a moment, Jan Fermon will talk you through the English version of the indictment, so it would be great if you can keep it at hand. And if after Jan Fermon's introduction to our indictment, to our demand to collectivize Facebook, you share our objectives to turn it into a transnational cooperative of 2.5 billion people, please go to the website again, click the button, join the lawsuit, and become one of the co-signatories of the collective action lawsuit. Only through collective action can we turn Facebook into our collective property. So while you take a moment to go to collectivize.org and download the indictment, let me introduce to you lawyer Jan Fermon, who together with his colleague Quentin Marisal developed this collective action lawsuit over the past year. Jan Fermon is a lawyer at the Bar of Brussels since 1989, specialized in criminal law, international humanitarian law and human rights law. Since 2005, Fermon is a bureau member of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, the IADL, the biggest international organization of progressive jurists, founded in 1946 by lawyers who were active in the resistance. And Fermon currently serves as the IADL's Secretary General. During his work as a lawyer, Fermon represented trade unionists against attempts to criminalize collective action, victims of the genocide in Rwanda, and victims of war crimes committed by US troops during the war against Iraq and the NATO bombings in Libya. With Die Spraken, he published the book Political Defense in 2010. That's it from me, from Athens. Please stay safe, everyone, if you can. Social distancing does not mean we cannot seek for new forms of nearness and collective organization, and hopefully tonight can be a modest contribution to that effort. I hand it over now to lawyer Jan Fermon in Brussels.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jan Fermon. I'm practicing law in Brussels in Belgium. I was asked by Jonas Staal to draft an indictment for violation of fundamental rights by Facebook, a giant monopolistic player in the new data economy. I was supposed to present this indictment in front of you at a public gathering in Berlin, but unfortunately the COVID-19 crisis has put a stop to this. A coincidence, of course, even if the corona crisis illustrates dramatically that an economic system driven on a worldwide scale by the private interests of a very small number of monopolies has dramatic negative consequences on the fundamental rights of the vast majority. The right to health, to access to healthcare, and ultimately, unfortunately for too many, the right to life. Privatization and budgetary restrictions have undermined the ability of public health systems, in as far as they existed, of course, to cope with the crisis. The crisis underscores the necessity for public ownership of the health sector. And the necessity of public ownership is also the conclusion we draw in the indictment in relation to Facebook. I will get back to that in a second. Hopefully you had a chance to download the indictment on collectivize.org. I will walk you through the legal argumentation from the beginning, starting with the introduction, which showcases that the data industry plays an essential role in today's economy. Data are considered as the new oil. Collecting, processing and exchanging data has become one of the main pillars of today's economy. In part 1, on page 7 of the indictment, in the section called Facebook's monopolistic position and hegemonic ambitions for information exchange and communication, information is provided on the central role Facebook plays in this area. 2.2 daily billion users of the Facebook empire, which includes applications such as WhatsApp, Messenger, etc., receive, disseminate, or exchange information. They generate through this activity a tremendous amount of data that are subsequently mined by Facebook. This has allowed Facebook to become the 5th or 6th largest private company in the world. Facebook has a profound impact on many aspects of our daily life. Amnesty International describes Facebook as unavoidable for most of the world population, especially the youth. In part 2, on page 10 of the indictment, in the section entitled Facebook and the Potential for Influencing or Manipulating Political Choices, we documented a never-seen capacity to influence public opinion, to promote or censor ideas, to influence elections. Facebook has the ability to steer social movements either by promoting them or by curbing them. And Facebook does not hesitate to work with authoritarian regimes. A clear example is the Duterte presidency in the Philippines. The Cambridge Analytica scandal shows that the data collected by Facebook can be siphoned by obscure alt-right structures to spread their toxic agenda of hatred and division. We take note of the fact that Mark Zuckerberg solemnly declares that this has happened against the will of Facebook and will be avoided in the future. However, we also know that Zuckerberg or his successors might change their minds overnight if the prospect of the profit rate is high enough. Here is another parallel with the corona crisis. In a column published on the US media Truthout, Noam Chomsky argues that the corona crisis can either lead societies collapsing into authoritarianism or alternatively to rethink the problems of capitalist society and develop new forms of democratic, economic, political and social systems. Many governments are imposing severe restrictions to certain civil liberties, arguing that such restrictions are necessary in the fight against the coronavirus. While certain limitations, for example to the freedom to circulate and to meet with others, can be understood in times of corona crisis, extreme vigilance is necessary to make sure that such limitations will not be perpetuated once the health risk is over. Control over data plays an essential role in the risk for authoritarianism. That is illustrated by the extreme example of the Israeli program, which of course in the name of the fight against the coronavirus allows the Shin Bet, a secret service, to use the location data of mobile phones to determine the whereabouts of each and every citizen. In part 3 of the indictment on page 19, the influence of Facebook on labor relations is discussed. Facebook has invented a new form of forced labor, with some striking similarities with servitude under feudalism. Through their activity, Facebook users unintentionally create the raw material. Facebook takes possession of these resources and processes them. The new oil is taken away for free from those who produce it. Since we are in a position of dependency towards Facebook, we are mechanically led to generate data for the algorithm, as we just need to connect, talk with our friends or post a photo. In short, we are forced to provide Facebook with an activity that does have value. Thousands of pages have been written about the risk of Facebook for the right to privacy. Most court cases conducted until now throughout the world have concentrated on this issue. Of course, we deal with the question of privacy in part 4 on page 24 of the indictment. We think the general awareness of how deep Facebook penetrates our privacy is still very insufficient. On the pages 24 and 25 of the indictment, we explain, for example, the mechanism used by Facebook to build so-called shadow profiles, in which very detailed information is collected about Facebook users who did not accept to share their contacts with Facebook. By combining information provided by others who did accept, Facebook knows as much about you as if you gave the authorization yourself. In the indictment, we refer to some spectacular examples of how Facebook has reconstructed some of the most intimate episodes of the private life of its users. There is thus a global and severe underestimation of the peril posed by Facebook to the right to privacy. But there is, on the other hand, at least some consciousness about it. That is one of the reasons we concentrate in the indictment on other and less known aspects of the peril posed by Facebook to fundamental rights, whether it be people's rights or human rights, individual or collective rights. The international covenants on civil and political rights on one hand, and on economic, social and cultural rights on the other hand, were both adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on the 16th of December 1966. In their common Article 1, they state that people have the right to self-determination, that is, the right to freely determine their political status, pursue freely their economic, social and cultural goals. The text says, I quote, "All peoples may for their own ends freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic cooperation based upon the principles of mutual benefit and international law. In no case a people may be deprived of its own means of subsistence." End of quote. Peoples must be able to decide their own fate and future in order to exercise their right to development. To do so, they need to have control over the essential levers, both politically and economically. There is therefore another link between the topic of our Facebook event and the corona crisis. The corona crisis will trigger a major economic crisis. As during the bank crisis in 2008, the question will be, who will be saved, the banks and monopolies or the people? Control over the new oil data is decisive for the question how we can build in the future a world economy that protects the majority based on solidarity and cooperation. But it is also important for the immediate questions arising from the corona crisis. How jobs can be saved, how incomes and savings can be protected, and how new medicines and vaccines produced and made available to all. How can this be achieved if the essential raw material of the new data-based economy is under the control of a few private-owned monopolies? This is the red thread of our indictment, drafted of course before the corona crisis broke out. Our conclusion in part 5 of the indictment on page 28 was and remains that in order to protect people's rights and human rights, the data giants need to be under a probably new and to be invented form of public control and ownership. The right to self-determination, the right of every people to control the levers that allow to choose freely their future, is the mother of all rights. Control over resources is essential to assure an economy that guarantees the right to work, to housing, to healthcare, to access to culture for all. Control over information and channels to receive and disseminate information is absolutely essential to build a real democratic society, to fight the development of anti-democratic alt-right agendas. As said, data play an essential role in these questions. That is why we concentrated in the indictment on the menace posed by Facebook to the right of people to choose freely their destiny. We argue that it is impossible for states and even for international organizations such as the European Union to effectively control giant private interests such as Facebook by regulating some of its activities. Only full democratic public control and ownership can make structures as Facebook to be powerful instruments for human development and emancipation. We are aware of the challenges ahead. National courts, no more than governments or institutions such as the EU, can impose such public control over Facebook. National courts can at most impose some restrictions on the most outrageous excesses committed or made possible by Facebook. And we also know that in a global market-based economy, where the principle of private ownership of production is sacrosanct, controlling transnational corporations is anyhow extremely difficult or impossible. That is why we turn with our indictment to the United Nations Human Rights Council, which has been designated by the international community as the guarantor of the rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 2 subsequent international covenants. We certainly do not have blind confidence in the Human Rights Council. Therefore, we will submit our complaint to this body, but we will not give it out of our hands. We demand that the Human Rights Council includes our indictment in their agenda and adopts our argumentation to recognize Facebook as a public domain and subsequently recognizes the need for users' ownership over the platform. Further, this argumentation will need to be structurally applied to other monopolies as well, whether this regards Alphabet, the parent company of Google, Microsoft, or Amazon. But we are also aware that only a protracted social movement throughout the world will create conditions in which states and international bodies will effectively act. Our aim with this indictment is to contribute to these 2 lines of struggle, the legal struggle on one hand and the social one on the other. Tonight, we might not have been able to gather as we planned, but we launch our indictment and campaign nonetheless. I hope I was able to provide some additional context to the legal argumentation and strategy through which we aim to collectivize Facebook. And I invite you to read the indictment in detail and join as a co-signatory to this collective action lawsuit on collectivized.org. If we bring this case forward as a movement, we simultaneously make clear to the Council that we are ready to collectively govern Facebook as a movement. Keep safe, but also remain organized. I hope to meet you in the near future in Berlin.